History is full of intense and crazy times where we look back in shock that it happened. And here are some historical facts that might make you uncomfortable, as an example. During the years after the Civil War, millionaires could get away with almost any eccentric behavior. I mean, they still can. But being born the daughter of a prosperous family in 1837, Hetty Green was thriving, but it wasn't until she married another rich man that she really blew up financially. In an unusual move for the time, Hetty negotiated a prenuptial contract that kept the couple's finances strictly separated, and Edward agreed without hesitation, and Hetty divorced him when the bank began to use her money as if it was his. In his later bankruptcy filing, Edward's worldly assets consisted of $40 and a gold watch. Honestly, she called it when she knew something was up with that prenup. All of her life, Hetty had been very careful with money, starting with a modest inheritance and a few of the tips her grandfather left her. Despite her wealth, she was very cheap, which to be honest is a good habit to have no matter what the financial status you are. But being frugal can be a good thing as well a bad thing. But for Hetty, she might have taken it too far. When her son Ned broke his leg as a child, Hetty tried to set the leg herself because she didn't want to pay for a doctor, and when that didn't work, she disguised herself and her son as paupers and tried to get the clinic for free. They figured that they weren't, and they kicked Hetty and her son out. And apparently she did this very consistently, and she did finally consent to pay for medical care when Ned's leg became so infected that it had to be amputated. All because of her frugalness, even to sacrifice the well-being of her children despite being a billionaire. And speaking of rich people, everyone loves a good movie, and in 1978, a film buff and future North Korean dictator Kim Jong-il decided he wanted to make a really good movie. His goal was to gain global recognition for North Korea's film industry, since he himself was frustrated with his own films that he made in the earlier 70s. He could tell that in contrast to other world-renowned films, his was pretty stiff and lifeless, and so he went ahead and kidnapped South Korean actor Choi Eun-hee during her time in Hong Kong, as she was taken to Nampo Harbor, North Korea on January 22nd, 1978, which I think is today, January 22nd? Oh my god, she got kidnapped today, which is when this is being filmed, and was housed in a luxury villa. She was toured around the city and given a private tutor who instructed the life achievements of Kim Il-sung. Kim Il-sung took her to the movies, operas, musicals, and parties, as well as asked her on her opinions on various films and respected her perspective. She had no idea, however, that she was going to be used as bait for her ex-husband, director Shin Sang-ok, 5 years after she was captured. When she disappeared, Shin Sang-ok began looking for her in Hong Kong when he was also kidnapped. Not initially aware of the situation, he was finally reunited with his ex-wife at a party Kim Jong-il hosted. He kept them in North Korea for 8 years, forcing them to make movies, including his own version of Godzilla, Pulgasari, as the pair would finally be able to escape in 1986 during a press conference in Vienna under a protection of the US Embassy. Following their escape, Shin lived in the US, working in the film industry before returning home to South Korea. North Korea denies any part of the kidnaps and claimed that only 2 openly had willingly defected to North Korea on their own. And when it comes to interesting facts about parts of history, Pompeii has its own when it comes to food. Like all fancy restaurants, they have their prized renowned dishes, as they all love to serve food, as they don't just serve ratatouille, they literally served rat. Ooh-wee. According to this restaurant found by an archaeologist, this food hotspot was known to serve honey roasted rodent. Interestingly, there were excavations of goat, pig, and dog bones and snail shells, which shed more light on the restaurant's meat-rich and exotic menu, especially the diets of the people of Pompeii. Experts believe that preparing food would have been displayed in a large dolia jar sets in holes covered in a stone counter, similar to today's takeout restaurants. Although there were no Uber Eats back then, you can definitely order this restaurant meal on Uber Eats now, because the good news is that this restaurant is actually still open to the public, so explorers can discover the delicacies of ancient Italian cities. But no rat, I'm afraid. I don't think that's allowed. The location also served as a bit of a somber note, a gravesite during the eruption of Pompeii's Mount Vesuvius, as the bodies of the restaurant owners as well as the patrons were also discovered in the excavation of the food joint. But who would definitely be eating these dishes aside the people were the sharks of the Jersey Shore. The Jersey Shore shark attacks of 1916 were a series of shark attacks that occurred along the coast of New Jersey, United States. The attacks took place over a 12-day period in July, and the attacks occurred along the coastline, as incidents reported several beaches and different towns of the beach towns, including Beach Haven, Spring Lake, and Matawan, as the attacks resulted in a total of 4 deaths and 1 non-fatal injury. The attacks were so caused widespread of a panic and fear, as shark attacks were considered extremely rare at the time. Many people were shocked and terrified by the sudden and deadly encounters that the attacks received extensive media coverage both nationally and internationally. Newspapers reported on the incidents in great detail, contributing to the overall sense of fear. The species of sharks responsible for the attacks was actually never identified, and various species including great white sharks and bull sharks have been suggested as the culprits. In 1916 Jersey Shore shark attacks are considered a pivotal point and event in history of shark-human interactions and played a role in shaping public perceptions of sharks. Which makes sense with Jaws. Although majority would love the idea to live forever or be immune to illnesses, but for King Charles II, he had it arranged that mummies in Egypt be taken back to made into medicine and eat them. Yes, he would eat people. The European royals ate the royal mummies of Egypt. Considering the early 1900s, mummy mania was a dichotomy of fascination for many years. From the Middle Ages to the 19th century, and considering the era, ancient Egyptians were considered one of the most advanced civilizations around the world. With that being said, seeing these eternal mummies, Europeans would prescribe ancient mummies as a medicine. Gross. Ground of the skeletons of their remains would be used to treat illnesses, headaches, or even the plague, and so with the king consuming the mummies, it was left the impression that the royals and social elite seems appropriate to eat other royals. It wasn't just the king though. Apparently a lot of royals also did this, like William II of England, Francois I of France, and Christian IV of Denmark, all cannibals when it came to this medicine. And although these pharaohs were being eaten by other people, in ancient Egypt when the pharaoh died, he would sometimes have his servants, his spouses, and his concubines, even his pets, die along with him to join him into the afterlife. For the emperor Qin Shi Huang, who was the first emperor of China, needed an army to protect him in the afterlife. The Terracotta Army is part of the world's largest ancient imperial tomb complex as Qin Shi Huang's mausoleum. About 8,000 different life-size statues have been uncovered. It is the largest find of its kind, as statues of 175 to 190 centimeters tall. The Terracotta Army was actually accidentally discovered when a farmer, Yang Zifa, uncovered fragments of pottery when digging a well. And aside the discovery of the Terracotta Army, as mentioned in the previous part of this list, you'd be surprised to also find that the same emperor was buried with a river of mercury. According to historical dating back to 2,200 years, the mausoleum chambers of the Terracotta Army Emperor Qin contains large amounts of liquid mercury, considered as an elixir of life at the time. During researchers' investigation of highly volatile mercury may be escaping through the cracks which developed in the structure over time. Aside mercury being considered an elixir of life, the ancient Chinese believed that ingesting long-lasting mineral substances such as jade, cinnabar, and hematite would confer some of that longevity on the person who consumed them. Gold was also considered particularly potent as it was a non-tarnishing precious metal, and the idea of potentially drinking gold is found in China by the end of the 3rd century BC. Many of these substances, far from contributing to longevity, were actively toxic and resulted in Chinese alchemic elixir poisoning. And ancient Chinese historian Sima wrote on the room, "The floor of the central burial chamber floats on rivers, lakes, and seas of mercury." That's a big one, seas. The vaulted ceiling is inlaid with pearls and gems to emulate the sun, moon, and the principal stars of the constellations in the night sky. Despite the site being unstable for archaeological expeditions, it might have been quite the sight to see. And although it wasn't a widespread phenomena, it definitely was for this man in space. In 2003, Yang Liwei was floating in his capsule minding his business, as he just made history as China's first man in space. He was alone in the void until someone was knocking on the door, and in space, apparently you can hear tapping. Back on Earth, Liwei described the event to reporters that the sound reminded him of someone knocking on the body of the spaceship, just as knocking on an iron bucket with a wooden hammer. He could not place the source of the sound, and he said it neither came from outside nor inside the spaceship, and he sent an explorer to the shuttle for any hints. Staring out of his porthole, he saw nothing noticeable outside, and there was nothing faulty inside either. No one could explain the eerie knock, and upon returning to Earth, Liwei inspected the capsule again, and he and his coworkers were still shocked. The crew attempted to recreate the sound, but nothing came close because the sound needed a medium, and most likely there was an object hitting the spacecraft, no marks indicating outside contact. The most accepted theory is that the metallic surface of the exterior contracted while exposed to the cold vacuum of the space was what made the sound. However, other astronauts have reported similar sounds in 2005 and 2008, leading to the credence that it had to do with temperature, but you know, the truth is out there and it's still probably just thermal change or maybe something else. In 2013, graves were discovered in the construction of the new road near a town in Poland. The deceased had been decapitated and buried with their heads between their feet. Decapitation was believed to be keeping the dead from rising from their graves, as this was probably to the idea that in this era they thought people were vampires. Archaeologists from the various Slavic countries have been found in multiple examples of vampire burials. Other later discovered graves showcase other methods for keeping the dead from coming back. For example, the skeleton of a woman was buried with the sickle over her pelvis, other than skeletons also being buried with sickles over their throats so that they wouldn't have to get up and being raised from the dead. Other methods of burial found included burying the body upside down with a brick in their mouth. Otherwise, as horror movies go, that's still a pretty weird thing to do. And his name starts and ends with an E. When he was discovered in 1886 by the head of Egyptian Antiquities Services, Man E was found in a plain coffin wrapped in sheepskin. However, his hands and feet were bound, and probably the most terrifying part is that his face was frozen, kind of looking like he was screaming. Due to the way that his face and body was contracted, the scientists believe that Man E might have been poisoned or buried alive. Whatever the cause, the man was definitely in pain when he died. Also, he was not just mummified in the traditional way, as still as all of the other internal organs were still inside. There were also some odd suspicions of who the body belonged to, as some experts may actually think it's Prince Pentawere, the son of Ramesses III, who was part of a conspiracy with his mother to get get rid of his father, and conspirators back then were typically caught and gotten rid of, and whoever this mummy was, his expression was captivated by people all over the world. And in 2016, at least 80 shackle skeletons were discovered in Palaio, a suburb of Athens, Greece, and their hands were shackled, and in true of their discovery, many lie with their mouths as if they were screaming as well when they had passed were also open. The skeletons belong to young men who apparently were in very good health, and archaeologists believe that these men have been followers of Cylon, the nobleman and the Olympic champion, who attempted to take over Athens over 7th century BCE. This infamous event was also known as the Cylon Affair. After Cylon's coup failed, his followers took refuge in Athena's temple, and the followers were then found by their enemies and killed right after leaving the temple. Pottery nearby of the site helped archaeologists date the burials to the period where the coup took place. However, it is also possible that the skeletons belonged to slaves or criminals, all of which is pretty wild times when it comes to history. And speaking of history, that's all for today. Thank you for joining me. Be sure to like and subscribe. My name is Jess, and I wish you all the best. Bye.